it's kind of tragic that because where he is in his headspace, because like the fact is that even while he was saying that kind of dickish thing, I agree that he probably wasn't being honest, but I don't know enough about the situation to imply or to know what his motivations were. He may have believed that consciously because of his own shit. And it sounds like the shit that he's been steeping in for the last 20 years. I mean, obviously that shit has an impact. You've seen that he's not the like the most stunning example of a healthy, mentally healthy, balanced, supported, loved INFJ would not behave in that way. You know what
He's
I mean?
kind of shell shocked, you know. By the way,
Yeah.
I started recording 45 seconds ago again.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Uh, so that's like, I mean, it's hard because, on the one hand, you want to have compassion for that because, like, the whole hurt people, hurt people, hurt people, like the thing you were talking about earlier with the FE implications on implications on implications, like, you can't help but see that. But on the other hand, it's also true that he is an autonomous adult and has to choose himself in some way. And he's continuing to live in a way where he's not.
Right, and I don't know if there's anything I can do or say
Oh, I'm
that
sure there's not.
can help him with his circumstances, or I do think that like he should get out of that relationship, even though he's been in it for such a long time.
Right, right.
And I do think that if he did get out of it, he would begin to know. I mean, I think it would be a long process of him coming to terms with what had just happened to him for the last couple of decades. But I think he would recognize pretty quickly that it was he's no longer in a war zone, and that he has been in one. And that's the key thing, is that it's like you either exist in a world where you got to look over your shoulder and walk on eggshells and do shit like that, or you exist in a world that you can stride mindlessly, blithely about without worrying about running into shit or whatever. And if it's the latter, then the circumstances have optimized for your stack, and you're in luck. You get to be a life coach who knows how to do things.
Right, right. Yeah, but you also have to be able to believe that you have that agency. You have to have the awareness to see that it's a thing, that's that it's even a thing in the first place. And then you have to have somehow magically grow the belief that you're entitled to better than what that thing is. And then you have to like come to terms with all of the shit that means. And then you fucking have to do like it is a lot. Like I have been fortunate in my choice of partners as an adult to have not had any abusive ones. Like I picked good people, even though it didn't work, and it was problematic. And it wasn't like there was bad shit that in an ideal situation, I wouldn't have had to tolerate, but it was nowhere near abusive. You know what I mean? But even so, even in those less extreme circumstances, especially the one that started when I was in my mid-20s, my marriage, like it took me years to even come to an awareness of what the dynamic truly was. Then more time to believe that I could have anything, could even ask for something better and deserve it. Like the long fucking process and the best of circumstances, which sucks, but like the other part of the equation is that you're also a bubble of a human just floating around in the universe, and you also have needs. And like it is not okay for somebody who says they're your friend to, I mean, using Eric lingo, on invalidate your ontology. Like,
Right.
I would say like be mean, and not supportive, and like
And the thing is, in my opinion, if you're in a relationship with an INFJ, you really need to be proactive, because it's not enough to just to just not cross their boundaries, to not shit on them. You have to actively remember to ask things like, well, what do you want this time? Because an INFJ is going to default to what the other person wants every time. And so it's, you almost have to be proactively protective of an INFJ's interests. It's not a problem if you're a fully gay couple like me and Rachel, because then you really see yourself as two people, as one person who's made out of two people, and there's not. It's like there will never come to pass a moment where Rachel says to me, "I'm upset because I've conveyed to you, either subtly or explicitly, that I don't like meow, or that meow is important to me, and you've ignored those words."
Mm-hmm. Which is amazing because, like, literally, like, no word of a lie with my. So I'm pretty demisexual, so I don't like really casually date or anything like that. I never really have been very good at it. So
Is that half sexual? Is that what demisexual means?
have you never heard that phrase before? It
Uh-uh.
just means that I have a preference for having an emotional bond and a knowing of a person prior to becoming physically intimate. Like, I don't do one night stands. I don't casually fuck. I just.
I thought maybe it meant you were only attracted to demigods.
Well, yeah. I mean, it feels like I've narrowed my pool enough where that might as well be true. But anyways, so, I've only had a few partners, and now I've forgotten the fucking point I was going to make about them. Oh, yes, I do remember. Is that with the two longer term ones that lasted multiple years, both of them kind of ended with the same way, where I literally said the words out of my actual face. We need therapy. I don't know how to handle this. You don't obviously have the tools for it. We can't figure it out. We need some help if we're going to figure out how to make this work. For literally more than 2 years. In one, it was like 3 years, and one, it was like 2 years. And that was finally this, like, the not being heard, the not hearing the actual words, because, like, I will be subtle as long as I possibly can be. And if I have to go beyond subtlety to actually using my words that directly, regardless of the knowing that it's, like, hurting somebody's feelings to say that, then, like, take me fucking seriously.
The other thing that really helps if you're with an INFJ is to make explicit the metacognitive work. So to say things like, "Oh, I'm sorry, you were trying to indicate earlier that I was meow, 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 meow. I didn't pick up on it, and now that's why you're saying meow, and that's my bad. I should have picked up on it earlier. I got you. My bad."
I know.
That helps an INFJ a lot, because then they feel like not only are they heard, but they're understood.
That is definitely true, but I think it's also to hold myself and other INFJs, I guess, out there accountable. That can also be a very slippery slope into unhelpful passive aggression and, down the road to, what's that word? Resentment.
If you're with the wrong type, for me, it's a delightful, intuitive thing that we're both operating on the same level of meaning sensitivity. Like, an instrument is very sensitive, can detect slight vacillations in a thing, right? So ENTPs and INFJs both have that with meanings and communication things in a way that I think we both find delightful. So when I'm saying that to her, I'm not saying, "Oh, you were being passive aggressive before." I'm saying, "Oh, you were trying to be nice and not have to be and not have to. You're trying to cue me without, while preserving all of my dignity. Sometimes she does that too much. It's like, Rachel, will you stop trying to like frame things so that it's my idea when it's your idea? It's a good idea. Why don't you take
Yeah.
credit for it?
Right, right. Oh, it's uncomfortable. But yeah, and I think like I guess I was saying that more not with regards to you and Rachel, because like you two do seem to have like a yeah, a really healthy relationship, like a good example of a healthy communicative relationship. And but I think that INFJs in general, I think especially, you know what? I'm just trying to speak for myself. In my times of being less solid mentally, and I still obviously waffle on identity, but I was definitely worse when I was in, 20 fucking years younger. I'm almost 50. And like I was definitely super fucking passive aggressive. I definitely wish that I had learned about those things more, and when to be subtle and when to use that and when to recognize that I'm being subtle to my own detriment as well as to the detriment of the dynamic, you know?
Yeah. Um, it's it's natural if, to the extent that you're both being ontologically assaulted in some fashion and not being heard, that's going to erupt in some way.
Yeah.
If it erupts steadily, slowly over time, it erupts as passive aggressiveness. If it erupts periodically, then you get Rachel's freakouts occasionally, But what I would say about me and Rachel is we are counterpoint to the notion that healthy relationships involve some fighting. Rachel and my relationship involves zero fighting at all. It involves it did maybe at the very beginning of the relationship involve some fighting until we realized we were fighting against our previous partner still, and that when I said meow, it was not at all the same thing as when Joe said meow, and that
Right.
when Rachel said meow, it was not at all the same thing as when Kim said meow.
Yeah.
Even though they might have been the same words, that the that intention, that malice was absent, and that
Yeah.
ultimately the bad relationships, what the engine of it is, I think, disdain. The other person expresses disdain for you, and it's the engine of their communications. Whereas you might say the same words, but there'd be no disdain in you, and then you could be trying to solve a problem.
Right.
So
Right.
if you, when you're in a BPD relationship for a bit, then you get accustomed to things having an underlying hidden disdain, either thinly hidden or well hidden, depending on. I mean, you learn to see through their various tricks pretty quickly, but yeah, Rachel and I basically never have any conflict. And some
Mm.
people would say that means it's not a very healthy relationship for some reason. It's like there is this message out there that says a healthy relationship has some conflict. Rachel and I are not always in agreement about absolutely everything, but the resolution of those matters is simple, and the things we disagree. I can't even think of any examples really. It's like we don't we don't talk about things like that we disagree about that one might argue about. So Rachel
Right.
and I don't have the same position on abortion necessarily, but we don't want to talk about that. I respect that
Right.
she doesn't agree with me on that, and she respects me that I don't agree with her on that, and we just, that's it. There's nothing else to say about it. I don't need her to agree with me because TI is not an absolute value for me, and she doesn't need me to agree with her because TI is selfish for her. So
Mm.
as long as the subject's not coming up, she doesn't have to TI it, and it doesn't matter.
Right.
It's just the shit that she wants to TI needs to TI properly. So if I were inconsistent, Like, if I were saying things that invalidated her worldview consistently, that would be a problem. But when it comes to things like particular political positions, that's easy enough to compartmentalize.
Yeah.
So
And
that's why we don't argue, because I think really people shouldn't have conflict with each other when they're not having conflict about community matters.
mm,
It makes sense to have conflict about community matters because there's multiple parties with individual interests. Often they're in competition with one another, those interests. And so there's going to be conflict about what's best for the group when the group comprises a bunch of individual voices. But in your personal relationships, if there's a lot of conflict or people getting their feelings hurt periodically one way or the other, something's wrong there.
yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think also, this might be a good example of an imprecise use of words in the just collective, I guess. Because I think that when most people say conflict, they probably more mean either disagreement or a difference of opinion. Um, and I would say that, I mean, you don't need a difference of opinion to be in a relationship with somebody, but it's okay if there's differences of opinion. That doesn't make a relationship bad. Yeah, I think you're right. I've never, well,
I mean,
I don't,
couples fight over money, sex, and kids.
yeah.
So Rachel and I don't fight over sex, and we don't fight about money because neither of us is very shopping oriented.
Mm,
So, and we are shopping oriented about the same things. We both like to get consumables more than objects,
mm,
and and we treat our finances as one thing. So, at all times, we're in the same boat financially,
yeah.
and and there's nothing to fight about because since we always do everything together, it's not like she comes home with a bunch of bags from J.C. Penney's saying like, I'm home from shopping, I spent a bunch of money, and I'm like, we
Right.
can't afford that right now or anything because we're kind of like connected to the hip, you know.
Yeah. Right, right. Do you think that's where like with the Enneagram, how there's the different instinctual modes? Do you think that if you have, because you said that like, INFJs and ENTPs go together well, do you think that that dynamic would be not as smooth if those instincts didn't also match up?
Well, in my opinion, if you want to have a healthy relationship, maybe the first precondition to meet is that you both be SP, you both be SX, or you both be SO.
Mm,
Because that's the frame through which you're going to be doing all of your attending. It, do I view myself fundamentally as most myself when I'm part of a two-person team? Do I view my two-person team as something that I have, as one of the things I have, right? Like, so in other words, if I'm self-preserving, I view the two-person team as one of the things I have.
mm,
Or do I view the two-person team as part of a larger whole and devoted towards being part of that larger whole? So if both parties are SX, like me and Rachel, you get this kind of relationship where we're connected at the hip, we do everything together and spend all our time together, and are a gay couple. If you are get two self-preserving types, those are the most straight couples. So
mm.
they keep separate bank accounts and are kind of dicks to each other and expect each person to be sort of emotionally sufficient. It's weird, you know. And then if you get two SO types, that's kind of like a gay straight couple. So it's like socially they're very gay about their social coupleness. They're they're gonna be super about taking pictures and documenting their engagement, but it's gonna be with the group. But then at home, they're gonna view each other as inadequate to be satisfactory in and of themselves, right? That you know, the time during the week when they're not engaging with the group as a couple, they're probably operating as independent operators.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, like I did take, well, I actually went through the whole long test with Peter Dentici last week, and that was fucking painful. And we didn't do the modalities at all, but that one I think is the one test that I like, online test, that I ever paid for. And I don't remember what the numbers were, but it was like there was one that was like 1 point higher, and then the other two were 1 point behind and exactly the same. So I was pretty much as split evenly as you could get between the three, which was just, another annoying thing that I'm like, why am I so hard to nail down? Like,
The thing is, I think the best way to test an Enneagram is always just to ask people directly. Because unlike cognitive functions, Enneagram is a taxonomy of the subjective. And people subjectively value their subjective values for subjective reasons. So
right.
Somebody who is a 2 instead of a 3 or a 4 will think 2 is better than 3 or 4. Somebody who's a 3 will also think 3 is better than 2 and 4. So
right.
Whereas everybody's going to think being logical and smart is better than deciding things with your feelings, because of the various narratives that society has built up in this onslaught of concurrent frame bias projections called history up till now.
Really? That's interesting, because like I was kind of surprised, because your 3-question Enneagram test, kind of based on that, because I'd never really heard of tri-type until relatively recently. Like I knew I was a 9, 9-wing-1, but beyond that I didn't really know. I thought, based on the fear question, that I was a 7 for that, whatever. And 7, I think, actually ended up being one of the ones that I like. It was like third from the bottom. I think it was like 7, 2, 8 were my bottom 3.
Okay.
Yeah. But
so here's the thing: if that Enneagram test were accurate, then you really should end up with one number, like, okay, so like this. If I'm a 7, then I should end up with 5 and 6 towards the bottom. Because there's some exclusivity there. In other words, if I really am constantly burying my head in the sand, and your test is measuring that quality, then in exchange for constantly taking that approach to the fear question, my 5 and 6 should be at the bottom.
Right.
And if I really am, say, 9 first in the 8-9-1, but but that's second in the tri-type, then the same phenomenon should occur, but slightly less, like more towards the middle, right? And if I really am a 2 out of 2, 3, 4, but it's in the third slot of my tri-type, then those numbers should do the same phenomenon, but even closer to the middle. If you think about the range, okay? So, yeah. But did that test produce those results for you? So you said the 3 from the bottom were what? 7, 8, and 2?
Hang on, I wrote it down because I knew I wouldn't remember. It is... Yeah, 2, 7, 8 were the bottom 3.
Okay. So that should not be the case if it were a good test. Because what's your first number?
9.
Okay. So if you're most predominant quality is 9ishness, then your least visible Enneagram qualities should be 8 and 1ishness. So the bottom should be 8 and 1. You said 8's in there, right?
8's the very bottom, yeah, and 1 was dead center.
Okay. So the problem is, if I'm an 8, what that means is when somebody comes at me with anger, I'm most likely to respond with anger. Or if somebody crosses a boundary in a way that might potentially anger somebody or make them feel sad or just cause some other kind of response, it's going to cause me to feel angry, and I'm probably going to externalize that anger by saying, well, what are you doing, mister? You know? So if it's the case that that is the predominant force in my emotional spectrum, then it is definitely the case that the alternatives, one of the alternatives to that, namely that I say, you know what, you're mad, I'm going to walk away, is rarely manifest, very rarely. And that also the other alternative to that, oh, I'll just appease you, is also very rarely manifest. In other words, it's implicit to the idea that there's a head, gut, what's the other one? Head, gut, heart.
Mm-hmm.
Triads. So that test this is why I say the best thing to do with the Enneagram is not to pretend like it's a cognitive function thing in which you test like that, because it's always going to be a stronger test to simply ask somebody, what's your approach? Why do you not need to feel ashamed of yourself? Is it because you're a helpful person? Is it because you're high achieving? Or is it because you're a rebel and you don't need to live up to their standards? What's your answer?
I struggle with these questions. I mean, it took hours going through this test with Peter.
Right, but instead of going through a bunch of specific questions, just answer that question directly.
As I see myself now, I think 4 is my most likely motivator internally.
For not feeling ashamed of yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's not really a motivator, though. It's more like a narrative that you tell yourself. If somebody else is saying to you, shame on you, are you going to respond by, shame on me? I brought the cookies and the plates and the meow. What did you bring? How did you help? Are you going to respond with, shame on me? I've got the benzo and the mansion, and you're not, in comparison, not nearly as successful as me. Or are you going to respond with, shame on me? Fuck you for shaming. My rules are better than yours anyway.
And this is in terms of internal narrative as opposed to...
Right, you don't have to externalize this, yeah.
Okay. Then yeah, definitely 4.
Okay. And then the same question, you could approach the same thing in terms of fear. Somebody comes up to you and says, you should be afraid of this. Do you go, okay, well, hold on, let me research it? Do you go, well, we've never had any reason to be afraid of that before, and or, yeah, we should, because we have had reason to be, oh, that thing's going to happen again? Do you evaluate it like that, or do you go, I'm sure it's going to miss us?
I mean, I kind of do all of that. I think there are... yeah, I do. I kind of do all of that. Like that one I definitely struggled with most. And because I've heard you ask these questions before. And
it's funny, I never actually asked it like this, though. It's probably a better way to approach it. Someone comes up to you and says, is a good way to make it more concrete, you know?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And I think maybe this is just in part having a not super good memory, a not super good idea of self, and a over reliance on abstract concepts as opposed to like individual instances of life. But I can easily say all of them.
Okay.
even
So
though they
yeah,
are mutually exclusive, because I don't actually know. Because I don't actually know.
what I was gonna say before you said it was basically what I was thinking of getting to eventually, but then you just said it was that this is SI8 that I'm asking to do a lot of work here. Now, to the extent that you can push on an SI8 from an INFJ and get results from it, it's going to be in terms of the examples, particulars that help explain things. When you start pressing on them about their actual personal knowledge about their subjective selves, you discover that it's like asking me what I'm going to do later. So I'm saying to you, well, uh, tell me what you know about have how you always are regarding this.
Yeah.
And
Oh my
that's a
God.
tough one because it's hard for you to come up with at that point examples of how you be of you being,
Yeah.
because that's kind of keeping track of your own being is an SI thing, whereas keeping track of, I guess you'd say, the reality of the external world is an NI thing.
Okay. So that explains, I mean, that test is, I mean, obviously you can see just your literal one question threw me into a, like, right into the existential void because like I really, I don't know.
Okay, so which one do you think is the best way to deal with it? Like this one does seem like it's got better choices than worse choices, right?
Yeah. So wait, what you research? What was the other one? What was six?
Six is you either agree or disagree based on whether it's happened before. So like
Oh,
he goes, there's a hurricane heading our way. And you go, well, hurricanes never hit us before. It always goes either south or north. I've lived here for 50 years. We're going to be fine.
mhm.
That would be a six kind of response. Although it would be kind of seven-ish because it's saying we're going to be fine. Or a six response would be like, oh, a hurricane's coming. Well, we're going to be okay because I'm going to board up the windows. I already know this protocol. I've done this before. I've got all this stuff. I'm prepared for this. That would be really a six kind
Yeah.
of response. That'd be a better one. I scratch the thing I said before that. And then a seven response would be like the thing I said, which is, oh, I haven't experienced it yet, maybe, but regardless, it's probably it's. Are you sure it's not shampoo that washes right out? There's a joke from Marge Simpson when Bart got gum in his hair, and she says, "Gum in your hair? Are you sure it's not shampoo that washes right out?" That's the seven attitude. It's probably shampoo.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, it's funny because I think that my interpretation of seven, based on other times I've heard you kind of talk about this briefly, was a little bit different. Um, I was thinking of seven as in which I think maybe I was thinking of seven through an avoidant five lens.
If
Uh,
you listen to Peter Dintici, it's really complicated. If you listen to me, it's very straightforward and very limited in what you can do with it. Right? It's a
right.
taxonomy of one's uh, emotional strategies towards these three core aversion buoys: rage or anger, uh, fear, and shame.
Yeah.
It basically recognizes that on the FI plane, nobody likes those three things.
Yeah.
Ultimately,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah. Yeah.
although anger is much more of a mixed bag in terms of its, I guess, morality than shame and fear. Shame is sort of morally neutral, but potentially indicates you having been wronged, depending on your interpretation of the word. And fear is morally neutral as well, whereas anger is seems more like morally instrumental.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and also just in terms of productivity and in moving one's self forward in any way, whether that's on an individual or a collective basis, Shame very rarely serves us. Fear is often used against us, but anger can truly be productive if it's used properly. Um, for the common good. Whereas I feel like the other two are almost exclusively oppressive.
Well, I mean, I guess some people might argue what some people might argue about shame, I think, is better attributed to a word called guilt. Sometimes guilt's useful if you genuinely have reason to feel guilty. It's good to
Right.
feel guilty and let that motivate you to make amends or make the change or do what you need to do or whatever.
Right. Right.
But shame is different than guilt in typical definitions of it because it's guilt about you being you.
Yeah, exactly. Which is just not productive. I mean, that doesn't, I mean, guilt can give you a place to move from. Shame is just like a downward spiral in one direction, Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's interesting. So I think 5 is probably the best answer. I think that the reason I was so drawn to 7 is that because even though I might feel a responsibility to learn about things and research things, I do also know of myself that I am avoidant, but that doesn't mean the instinct isn't there. It's me avoiding the instinct because I'm afraid of what the knowledge will tell me sometimes.
Oh, that's very 7 sounding.
Is it really?
Yeah,
Okay. Well,
yeah.
yeah. I don't.
Okay, that's what 7 is. Look, it's not like being 7 means you actually believe it's going to miss you, the storm, right? It means I'm not I'm not in the middle of telling that story right now, and this hurricane arriving is interfering with what I'm doing. I'm not quite ready to accept that it's coming, so
Yeah.
I'm going to throw out there this possibility that maybe we don't have to worry about it. Maybe it's shampoo; it'll just wash right out. Eventually, of course, everybody has to deal with realities, and fear manifests for people who have SE in a bad spot, often as deadlines, task completion stuff that's
Hmm.
looming and they haven't gotten around to it yet, and every day takes by and they go, I gotta get to that thing. Well, if you're an SI person, you think that every day. If you're an INFJ, you have this blessedly, like, unaware ability to be unburdened by stuff until you do it. And then so it's like you go from unburdened to burdened to doing it to unburdened again. Whereas, so in other words, you might put it off for the same length of time, but the whole time that I'm putting it up, I'm continually reminding myself that I have to do it. Whereas when the INFJ has enough time has passed, their NI goes, now it's time to fret. And then they start fretting about it, and then they do it in short order and stop fretting about it. And so it's a much better way to be a slacker, your way, than my way. My way is more stupid because I waste a lot of time and attention reminding myself to do something that takes fucking 5 minutes to do.
Yeah. I mean, it might. I mean, perhaps. It's interesting. This is being recorded, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Because I want to re-listen to that part and think about that some more. Because as you were saying it, I was having thoughts that are already just completely fucking gone. God damn it. Um, oh, I was recognizing that that is exactly what I do. But on top of that, and maybe this is because I have a mom, my mom has SI high up somewhere. I haven't ever typed anybody, but like that's apparent. And so there's like that voice in my head, I mean, one, you're familiar with internal family systems. That's right. So you know what I mean by parts. But yeah, like one of the parts in my head guilts me during the time that I'm doing the avoidance stuff before I'm like, okay, now it's time to fret. I'm actually judging myself about the fact that I'm not fretting. So it sucks either way. Like I'm still wasting time putting mental energy into shit
Okay.
that
So I just because you don't show it the way that I do in ways that I could pick up on, doesn't mean it's not happening. Okay, fine.
Oh yeah, it's still a mess.
Because like I'll tend to say that shit out loud, like, oh, I got to do that thing. So I assume that if I'm not hearing that at all, it must not be happening in any way in the other person. But I could, they've
No,
got
and
their
that
own version of it, I guess.
yeah, and that may or may not be a specific, like one of those things that comes down to type versus one of those things that comes down to um I think even like I judge myself particularly harshly. And I know that's an issue for lots of people. I don't know if it correlates with type or not,
It
but
does.
it does. Does it really?
Well,
So which one?
yeah, because what I'm saying is this. Um, the reason INFJs and ENTPs are both likely to judge themselves very harshly is because, number one, they're directing the primary force of their attention either by their knowledge or their action function, INFJ and ENTP respectively, towards mapping correctly,
Mhm.
objectively, the world, and treat themselves as an object subject to the same kind of mapping that is in the world. Okay? And so there's a need to compare the self against other objective things in the world to understand the self. Now, the reality is, if you compare yourself against standards that are good enough for you to consume, then you might not match up very well against most things because you're comparing yourself against an ideal rather than against an average or against any other individual in a particular moment. And this is maximally so in the INFJ because SI backstack. But the I lost my train of thought. It happens. It's happened to you too. Maybe it's because
Oh,
we both smoke weed.
you know, you would think so, but like honestly, from like 22 to like my early mid 30s, I didn't smoke weed at all. Like maybe once every 3 or 4 years. And I didn't drink at the time either, and I was still like this.
Yeah,
Uh, like
I said that, but I've said in the past too. It's not true because I was like this even as a kid. I see my student Jeffrey, who's an ENTP, is the same way, and he's 13, 14, and definitely has never done any intoxicants.
right, right. Yeah, I remember being a kid. Actually, my mom used to get so fucking pissed when this would happen. But I have a sister who's 10 years younger than me too, and she, I would help out with her, and I remember my mom being like, go into the other room or go upstairs and get this or that or the other, and then I'd get upstairs, find myself in the middle of the room, just sort of spinning around, hoping something visually will catch my eye and trigger the memory of what the fuck I'm supposed to be doing in there. And then I'd have to go downstairs and be like, what? I'm sorry. What am I supposed to be doing again? I know it was like 40 seconds ago, but it's completely fucking.
Yeah, it does go fast in INFJs. I've noticed that with Rachel. Although I've also noticed that when somebody else asking you, it doesn't necessarily go that way. So when we're driving away from the house, sometimes I'll say, well, where are we going again? And she'll know the answer.
Mm-hmm.
But I bet she didn't know until I asked her.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Totally. I think that is 100% accurate because I've had that sort of experience. And when those moments happen, like they're pretty fucking satisfying. Like, oh, look at me go.
Or I always say, good SI.
Yeah, I guess that's the pat on my back that I need to give myself.
Yeah. And a lot of times, if there's something important like that I'm if somehow if I do remember it, then she doesn't remember it. But if it's if I don't remember it and I should remember it, there's a decent chance that some point before that moment happens, she's
Yeah.
gonna remember it and point it out to me. So like this happened the other day where oh right, I had made plans with to do work with this with Jeffrey and then after that I forgetting that I had made plans with Jeffrey had an impulse to call my friend Dave Porter and make dinner plans, which I did. And then after I was done doing that, not before I had done it, which is smart because she probably correctly intuited that I didn't really want to work with Jeffrey. I wanted to go with Dave, and I'd rather just make plans. And she said, "What about Jeffrey though?" And I said, "Ah, right. I like 15 minutes ago made plans with Jeffrey." Well, I'm just gonna have to cancel those. I don't want to do that. I want to go out to dinner with Dave now because I haven't seen Dave in ages. And last time we tried to hook up with him, he was like, "We can't tonight." So, anyway, it's that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, just I guess more evidence that you two complement each other pretty fucking perfectly.
The stack is fundamentally complementary. Is the other thing. It's like, in that regard, her SI kicks in when there's an NI significance factor, whereas my SI can drop out despite a significance factor,
Mm.
which is kind of
Yeah, yeah.
another way of saying ignoring NI.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like I don't require of her or push on her SI at all because I'm not relying on her to remember things. I'm assuming I'm remembering them, and that gives her an opportunity to intuit that I've forgotten something important rather than be expected to remember a bunch of shit.
Right, right, right. Yeah, yeah. Which is awesome because then she gets to show up and be the hero in the moment, and remind you where the fuck you're supposed to be driving to.
And I mean, there's other like another example of the power of NIFE and the underappreciatedness of the whole thing is like Rachel and I went to this estate sale, and she's like, "That looks like a nice wheelchair. You should tell your dad about it." And I said, yeah, that's good wheelchair. You know, basically that made me then go to SI and go, well, she already has a wheelchair, of course, but you're right, it is kind of a crappy wheelchair. But I mean, does it really matter that much? I started thinking all this stuff, but then I thought, yeah, it's not. Yeah, that's a good enough idea, I guess. But I didn't really put much weight into it. We came back. I didn't tell my dad about it, but then the next day, Saturday morning, he came out and chatted with me a bit and mentioned that he was going to the swap meet. And I said, oh, well, that reminded me of the estate sale we'd gone to the day before. And I said, by the way, there's an estate sale up there. It's got a nice wheelchair that's there for $50. And I don't know, maybe you want to check it out. Now, in my mind, basically what I was doing was FE. I was saying, okay, you're talking to me about this. You kind of seem like you want to chat. Why don't I contribute to the conversation with this detail that I'm fully expecting you to discard because it came from me, and every word that comes from me gets discarded as not heard typically. Instead, he goes, "Oh, where is it exactly?" And I go, "It's over there." And he goes there. The wheelchair is still there. It's he brings it home. It's fantastic. It's like top of the line, beautiful, perfect new condition wheelchair. He's
Nice.
absolutely thrilled, you know, and it gives us come out, check it out, and it's like it's just this great thing. And then we take it over to the nursing home, and now she's in the new wheelchair, and it also has like reclines, goes back and forward. It's like an impossibly great wheelchair,
Yeah,
and
you said
and
50 bucks.
$50, and I think my dad even, I think he said he talked him down $10 maybe, so it may have gone over $40. But and it's like, okay, Rachel didn't. There wasn't anything else that we saw in this whole estate sale that she said particularly anything about, right? So she says one thing on this one trip. It ends up having a huge impact, despite my NI ignoring, because I got lucky and there was an SI linkage for me now. So because my dad happened to be going to something like an estate sale the next morning and happened to be outside and chatting with me about it, in order to FE him, even though why I'm doing this is because I reflexively do it, even though I know better, there's no point in it. It's hard for me to understand how to be not me, right? So
Right.
I just go, well, here's my example of something relevant that might contribute to what you're talking about. And then it ends up being something that ultimately is hugely impactful. So my mom now is in a more comfortable, better wheelchair. From that point forward, every one of those days has a net total positive impact. And, and yet ultimately that thing gets underappreciated because it's like, well, so what? So she suggested that guy buy the wheelchair. Did she buy it? Did she? No. Because, of course, she has to manage that and also manage me.
Right.
So it's like, even though I'd be... And she's becoming more direct in her language with me over time. But I'd be fine if she said, hey, no, listen to me. We should really get that. But instead, she's trying to structure it such that I can tell my dad and sort of get credit for that. And in other words, she's attending to a lot of different factors as she's taking that small amount of action that ends up having a very large amount of impact on the overall scheme of things. Just as she took a small amount of action in the typing session I did with her, which was the first time I'd ever met her or talked to her. I'd seen her comments and stuff, but she took a small amount of action in that ended up making her my relationship partner and us being a gay couple here 2.5 years later, which is she made it clear to me during the typing session in a way that was the right amount of subtle / direct that how old she was, which because she had probably correctly intuited that she looked younger than that, and that I had eliminated her as a possible girl because I thought she was like 27 or something when she was actually 34 or whatever she was at the time, And by making sure that I was aware of that, ended up setting in motion. It took me a couple of days to NI it, to go, oh, that means I can put her back on the list of possible people.
Yeah, that was flirting. That's how we flirt. It's ridiculous.
I mean, it was a unique set of circumstances. At the time, she knew I was looking for a partner. And I was dating in a very unusual way, namely going on YouTube and saying, okay, I want a new girlfriend now.
No. Are you serious? You literally did that?
I mean, more or less, I said, okay, I broke up with my last girlfriend, so obviously now I'm looking for a new girlfriend. And I'll tell you what didn't work was, okay, Cupid got me this BPD person. So I'm just going to see if maybe I'm just going to try to stay out of a relationship. At first I said I'm going to try to stay out of a relationship and talk to some people, but I also knew that I don't juggle people, right?
Yeah, no,
I just can't even conceive of doing it. So fundamentally, I was looking for a girlfriend, but I also made sure to sort of say, hey, I'm not necessarily looking for anything permanent right away. I'm just blah, blah, blah. But But the thing was, I knew I like to be in a long-term relationship, and I don't like to not be in a long-term relationship.
Yeah.
And I was pissed at the universe because I keep trying to get to like my last chick, right? Like, the first chick, you go, okay, hopefully this first chick will also be my last chick. No, second
Yeah.
chick. Okay, maybe this one's gonna be my last chick, and we're gonna continue to pretend that it is until it's not. And then the third chick. Okay, now seriously, this one is my last chick. I'm going to put a lot of work into telling that story during this course of this relationship. And once again, your storytelling proves not determinate in the matter. And then you get your fourth chick. Okay, now this time I'm really going to tell this story hard. I'm going to tell it hard. This is definitely my last chick. But when you get with your actual last chick, like I'm with Rachel, the story the story doesn't get any pushback.
Yeah.
And when you aren't with the right person, it does. It gets pushback from yourself and it gets pushback from other people.
Yeah. 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 No, it's true. I mean, I don't know. It's so weird how often I kind of feel like I'm just in some fundamental ways not made for this world, and dating is one of them. And yeah, I don't know if I'll ever dip back into that.
You're made for a world of ether and wonder buns.
Yeah, I mean, obviously.
You know what a wonder bun is, don't you?
Well,
It's a
no.
cinnamon bun.
Oh,
It's a cinnamon bun crossed with a chocolate eclair, crossed with a sugar twist. It's actually a sandwich. It's got a chocolate eclair. In the middle of the sandwich is a sugar twist. And at the bottom of the sandwich is a cinnamon bun. It's called a Wonder Bun. I just made it up right now, and it's the hottest selling item in all of America.
I like all of those things separately. I'm not. I mean, maybe I'm just attached to the idea that showed up in my brain when you said the word Wonder Bun, which was basically an adorable little bunny that had like sparkles.
They shape Wonder Bun into the shape of a bunny. They take that sandwich and then they cut it with one of those stampers, shape stampers, cookie cutters, but it's in the shape of a bunny.
Oh my God.
That's a good idea. We should open up this shop at the local mall. We should go into business together, opening up Wonder Bun.
Do you still have a local mall that's functioning? Mine seems to have tanked in the last couple of years.
Santa Anita Fashion Park is fucking booming.
Really? Oh my God. I mean, I'm in Portland, so it's a small city, but it's kind of a city. And one of the malls, which used to be like full of stores, I went in there to get something at Macy's. Like, just I needed a generic shirt, and that seemed like a good cheap place to find it. And fucking Macy's closed. Like, most of the mall is empty. It's very, very bizarre. It feels a little post-apocalyptic, I'm not gonna lie.
Dying malls, yeah, they do feel post-apocalyptic. There was a time when, well, no, not Santa Anita, but I can think of a couple malls that have around here that have been through that phase before dying out, where I've been to them and they've been like half the stores closed. But Santa Anita, well, Arcadia is called in real estate circles sometimes anyway, quote unquote, the Chinese Beverly Hills. So in this neighborhood, there are constantly people driving very fancy cars, like especially people who live above the freeway are super rich, but people who live down here in the slums below the freeway are still, his houses are still like $1 million or whatever. So the thing is, the mall's full of like fancy stores and fancy Chinese ladies buying fancy things.
So it's all the high-end retail. Yeah, yeah.
And Rachel and I go there sometimes because they also have your regular mall stores, of course, because those fancy Chinese ladies in the fancy stores buying fancy things, their daughters are in H&M and Forever 21 and
Yeah,
there's other
totally.
kind of stores buying their version of fancy things.
Mm-hmm.
So the mall's doing quite well. I was interested in how the racetrack has really barely started coming back. Like when Rachel and I went to the races the other day, it was like it in the olden days. It would have been on a random Tuesday,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't even run during the week anymore. And it was a Saturday, and it was like there was a stakes race. We didn't stick around for it, but I think it was a race after we left. It was a stakes race, but I don't know how huge of a stakes race it was, but it was enough to like it, that if it had been a regular like a Saturday in the olden days, a Saturday with big kind of a name stakes race would have drawn a
Big crowd.
big crowd, and we had it was super pleasantly uncrowded. We could walk right up to the rail, no problem. Like I really need to put together a little movie about that because I did take some clips, some short clips
Oh,
of
nice.
video and stuff. I should definitely put up a short with the horses running right by because we could be right there on the rail as they're going. Pew.
Oh, wow. It was wow. Yeah, it's interesting to see as things kind of come back. Like, okay, so this is kind of a weird example, but right up the road from me, there's a Wendy's. And like most of the time when I'd been there like pre-COVID, it was probably on my way home from going out dancing at like 1 o'clock in the morning, 1:30 in the morning, and needing some fries and a frosty. And so I know they definitely used to be open late. They now close every night, 7 days a week at 6 p.m. 6, like that's before dinner even, like 6 p.m. Like I keep seeing like weird little things like that where hours don't make sense anymore. And yeah, I don't know.
LA is
It's
finally getting back to
weird.
normal. LA is really where I am right now is finally getting back to actually normal. There's still decreased attendance at the races, but now you go into stores and almost everywhere you don't have to wear a mask, and and um, people are gradually returning to their old habits. See, that's the thing that people didn't anticipate or think about as a consequence of the whole COVID shit is that people really have a tendency to follow along in existing habits. And when they set new habits, then that tendency applies to those new habits. Like I don't know if Rachel and I will ever go to the barbershop again
Mm.
because we got clippers and all the shit for cutting our own hair, and we got used to doing it, and we both sort of committed to just going with what do you call it, barber's cut. Pick a number, pick a number,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
length number on the lengthening thing,
Uh-huh.
and that's just all the way around that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so because we both kind of committed to that approach to our haircuts, no problem. We probably will never go to the barbershop again. And so that's like uh, if what if I were to tell you that when you first started advocating COVID that your policies will cost Lupe, my barber, from me alone for over the course of the next 20 or 30 years, $12,000.
Yeah.
It's like you never really quite hear impacts personalized like that, and then you say, well, now multiply that by whatever percentage of the population I represent that represents in her population of customers, and is quite expensive for her. And that's just one
No,
person who's being hurt.
and that's just yeah, you're right. And like if you sort of extrapolate that out and also overlay it with so for work I'm a like a legal assistant for until I can figure out how to not be. And I've been doing it for a long time, and I work specifically for like a title company in New England, which is where I'm from.
Well, at least you
And
finally got promoted from illegal assistant.
yeah, right. And so it's like I'm kind of tangentially involved in the real estate market out there. And a loan officer was telling my boss last week that, basically, I think the phrasing he used was that like residential mortgages are dying on the vine, and we have almost no inventory. And, so basically he was talking about in terms of getting into construction loans, but that paints a picture for a bubble, because if you have limited supply, like there's plenty of people entering or trying to enter the housing market while they can, because rates are still good and prices just become higher and higher. But like,
So I
I
don't
don't
get
know.
the dying on. I don't get the dying on the vine part. What's dying on the vine?
Basically what he was saying is they have plenty of people who would be willing to buy homes.
Oh, so
There isn't anything for them to buy.
it's the people that are the grapes, not the houses.
I mean, it's the lack of inventory, essentially, is what they're
But
saying.
in the dying on the vine thing, it's the buyers who are dying on the vine, not the houses.
No, well, okay. I think
Who are the grapes? What are the grapes in this dying
the
on the vine analogy?
grapes are mortgages. The grapes are the mortgage business.
Okay, so
And
how
and
does a
the
mortgage die on the vine? Is it offered for a limited time and then it has to die?
Oh man, I'm not capable of this.
I,
That was his metaphor.
I think his point is this, that we have not enough inventory for the amount
Yeah.
of buyers, and that we therefore lose those buyers in some regard.
Yeah.
That they go
Yeah.
off presumably to some other
They're looking at
area to buy in where that you don't operate in, or maybe they choose to rent or lease instead.
right.
Right? I guess
Yeah.
that would be the ultimate dying
Yeah.
on the vine, would be they lease instead.
Yeah. I think that's yeah. And like what I've seen also happen in the market, and I've heard of this happening with like some local people I know who kind of follow the local market here on the West Coast, that for whatever reason everybody always talks about supply chains, but like construction deals that were originally supposed to close I've got 2 that were supposed to close over a year ago. So it's like, not only is there not presently enough inventory available in certain markets, but there's also no promise of future inventory coming at a speedy pace. And so it's basically driving up the prices, which is in some ways pricing people out of the market. So then you've got willing buyers, but no place to go. But at the same time, it's also driving up the cost of living kind of all around, because there's a lot of investment purchases being made. So then people are renting out rentals that are more expensive now than they were a few years ago.
But
I don't know.
ultimately, it ends up driving people out of the state
Yeah.
until the equilibrium is restored by the population moving.
It seems that way, but I think, and this is what I don't get, and this stuff is very complicated shit that I don't really truly understand. But what I do know is that I've spoken with, like, there's a lot of empty inventory. There is a shit ton of empty inventory, and it doesn't matter if you're talking big cities like LA or small cities like Portland, or if you're talking about towns in Maine, because I talk to tax collectors in Maine, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire, and I've been kind of curious. And like, there's a lot of investment owned empty inventory. So it's not even that there isn't, like, if it were a true, like, free market where you had, like, it was primarily driven by owner occupied people. So you have people moving into their, like, buying their first house and leaving an apartment that they lived in. And, like, everybody just kind of like shifts along and the market's relatively stable. But there's a lot of interference. And like, I think Zillow was like, just in the past couple years has been doing this thing where they are purchasing up huge amounts of real estate. And also that is allowing them to basically fuck with the market, because if if they own a certain amount of properties within a small area, and appraisals are done based on recent sales of available properties in a certain area, and you've got one party paying over market value against the other schmoes who are trying to get into their first home, then they are now essentially bringing the market value up. So, you know what I mean? Like it's not really.
Well, they're turning it into a neighborhood of leasees.
Yeah, I mean, not all of the properties are being rented back. Some of them, it seems, are just honestly, I don't know what they're used for. I guess just as tax shelters for
I mean,
things.
that's not sustainable, though. If a corporation is buying a bunch of properties and letting them sit idle, ultimately, that's not a sustainable business model. So, they're gonna. But the thing is this:
and where you pay taxes and what I don't know. I have not fully researched into this, so I'm kind of talking out of my ass, but I've heard reference to the fact that it's a lot of foreign investors that are essentially using real estate as a place to write off potential taxes. Like it's a tax shelter, essentially.
I see. Okay, I understand. That's certainly plausible. Um, it's yeah, it's an interesting world. I think that people increasingly are moving towards having more transient relationships with objects,
Mm,
which may include even real property and homes. That it like I never felt as though it particularly made sense for me to buy a home because I had a good rate on my rental that I was living in Temple City, and we started off cheap, and he raised the rent at reasonable increments over time, so we were always below the average level in the neighborhood. Um, and it was a good school district, and lots of other reasons why it was a good deal, and that if I were to buy a home, it would be in a less good neighborhood because and it would take up a larger percentage of my income for housing,
right.
even in a less good neighborhood. So it was like, do I really want to commit to that reality for 30 years in order to what? Then have to have guaranteed no rent but property taxes thereafter? Well, property taxes can be quite high depending on where you are, and so you end up still paying a couple thousand a month.
Right.
And so, what exactly is the benefit of this?
Yeah, it's basically just a savings account. Because I mean, really it's the especially if you don't have access to any kind of generational wealth in like the big ways, which obviously most people don't. It's the surest steps towards financial solvency that you can realistically get, like the whole, as they sold the American dream, like buying that starter home and then
Okay,
living it, improving it, like the whole thing.
but here's the thing about that equity you accrue and that you eventually own, right? Is that anytime you use it for anything, like let's say you sell the house, well, then in addition to this chunk of change that you've saved up, you are now homeless.
Yeah, exactly I didn't say it was like, I never really did it either. I mean, I kind of did when I was married, but like I also, the house that I live in here, I have been living here for like 8 years. I rent it. It's definitely, especially as Portland has started really fucking popping over this last 6-7 years, it is definitely below market. A shit ton of my friends had to leave the city because they did eventually put caps on it, but the people were raising the rent without more than 30 days notice by like $400, $500, $600, even when people had been tenants for a number of years. just, suddenly somebody new owns the home because it's gotten to be a neighborhood that's worth it. So somebody cashes out, make what they can. And now you got a new, lord of the land lording it over you and wanting more money for it. So it's like, I've gotten lucky with this place, but it doesn't feel super secure. I know that they could sell this place and I could be fucked. And if I needed to rent, like, I would have to move out of Portland or be willing to have more housemates than I want, which is zero. I mean, I can barely afford this place without having a roommate. I've been doing it the last few months to try and test it out because I think I could get a roommate really easily if I wanted to, being where I am, but I don't want one at all. But yeah, it's gotten a lot more expensive. I'm sure you've seen it there too. I've heard people say in LA that it's even more expensive than it was a decade ago by a lot.
Maybe you could get a dog with a job.
That would be great. Like,
if you get a dog that was a good earner, that was like an actor, like you should. If there were dogs that are actors that don't currently have owners that are looking for a person, maybe you could get one of them. That'd be like not really a full blast roommate, 'cause it'd be a dog, but it would still pay its half of the rent.
Yeah, that would be. I mean, that would be probably. Well, I mean, my cat probably wouldn't like it.
Maybe you should tell your cat to get a job.
I mean, I've tried, but I mean, she thinks her job is just being fucking adorable and lovable, and she is very, very good at that. But sadly, it doesn't pay in dollar bills.
Maybe you should tell her to take her act downtown while you're at work and see if she can get people to, instead of giving her treats, to put money in a hat for her. She can stand on her hind legs and do little dances and meows. Meow, 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 meow. And you could write out ahead of time for her, please give me money on a sign. And that'd be great.
God, I'm about to be kicked out on the street.
Please give me money. I must dance and meow for my food.
Oh my God. Yeah. No, I don't. Honestly, I've spoiled her. Like, I've spoiled her past the point where I could convince her she needed a job even if she were capable. She knows she's a fucking princess.
My cat too. She's spoiled beyond all recognition. Is that moonshine you're drinking from that big
No,
jar? It looks like it might be moonshine.
No,
I got to split because I'm out of cigarettes. I've been out of them for a while. I've been smoking butts, and that just won't do any longer because I've smoked all the long butts. Now there's only the little teeny butts.
Yeah. I feel you. Well, thank you so much for helping me out.
My pleasure. Fun conversation. So I'll upload those 2 videos here at some point.
All right.
All right, cool. Like.